Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UAP, UFO news from everywhere and anywhere. Happy New Year to everyone. I'd like to start 2024 as a continuation of my discussion on alien abductions. I ended last year with a discussion of Jim Sparks and his book, The Keepers, and how he was continuously being tutored by aliens. And I thought that was quite interesting, especially since he did not engage in hypnotic regression. All of his alien abduction memories were 95% conscious. So today I'd like to continue with a discussion of John Mack and his involvement with alien abductions. He wrote a book, Abductions, and he's a psychiatrist from Harvard, who risked his reputation by getting involved in these abductions. At first, he was very skeptical, but the more he got involved, the more he believed that the people were not having delusions, were not suffering from hallucinations, but that they were actually experiencing something. So I'd like to discuss John Mack's book, Abduction, of course, just bits of it, and how he took abductions seriously. Also show how the aerial school incident in Zimbabwe had an impact on people's belief in actual aliens, and then finally end up with a more controversial point of view by Dr. Stephen Greer, who is of the opinion that abductions are not being conducted by NHIs or non-human intelligences or aliens, if you will. He believes that these are being conducted by black ops projects or secret military programs in order to create a false flag or a false belief that aliens are a national threat. So this is John E. Mack's book, Human Encounters with Aliens, Abduction. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. John Mack was a Harvard psychiatrist. He believes that there's something real that actually happened to these abductees, that he finally determined that there was no psychiatric explanation for what they were going through. So after working with the abductees,
after I'd worked with 40 or 50 of these individuals, I discovered to my amazement that there simply was no psychiatric explanation of this, that something real had happened to them.
A lot of abductions are explained as sleep paralysis, night terror, or some sort of psychological phenomenon. They tend to be explained away that way. Can alien abductions really be easily explained
by sleep paralysis, night terrors, and other psychological phenomena? But that all changed after hearing about the aerial school UFO sighting.
Yes, so essentially in 1994, 60 kids saw UAP and NHIs in a school in Zimbabwe. The kids drew sketches of what they saw and later were interviewed by John Mack. And they were pretty honest in their responses and never really deviated from their descriptions.
Well, that's scary because I've never seen such a person like that before. And I saw this person, and it had big eyes. That's all I saw about it, big eyes.
They had short legs and quite a long top, with a big head and eyes that are bigger than ours.
How much bigger than ours?
4 or 5 times the size.
4 or 5 times the size of ours.
What was really shocking is that they kept the same story to this day.
They swear it did in fact happen the way they described it.
I stand by what I saw. There was no reason for any of us to make that up.
I've not spoken to anybody about it. Not because I'm not proud of it, but because I don't want the stigma.
So it's something that I've had to deal with for 19 and a half years.
So the kids at the aerial school did not get abducted, but his interview with those kids was so convincing that it pulls you into his work with the abductees. So you got to wonder how the aliens keep from getting caught and what their end game is. Here's Dr. Gary Nolan and his take on what physical effects the abductees actually have gone through.
But when we were looking at the brains of these individuals, we noticed something right in the center of the basal ganglia in many of these individuals that at first we thought was damage. It was basically neurons that we thought was damage, but then it was showing up in everybody, and then we looked and we said, oh, it's actually not. The other readings on these MRIs show that actually that's living tissue. That's actually the head of the caudate and the putamen. And at the time, and I remember even asking a good friend of mine at Stanford, who's a psychiatrist, what does the basal ganglia do? He said, oh, the basal ganglia is just about movement and nerve and motor control. And I said, well, that's odd because these other papers that we were reading at the time started to suggest that it was involved with higher intelligence and is actually downstream of the executive function and involved with intuition and planning. And if you think about it, if you're going to have motor control, which is centralized in one place, motor control requires knowledge of the environment. What I think we found was a form of higher functioning and processing. So what we then looked at, and this was the most fascinating part of it, we looked then at individuals in the families of those, let's say the index case individuals, and we found that it was actually in families. And more so, this is the most fascinating part, we've probably looked now at about 200 just random cases that you can download off of databases online. You don't see this higher connectivity. You only find it in what Kit Green would have called or has called higher functioning individuals.
So according to Dr. Gary Nolan, the results of the MRI from these abductees shows that there's a special connection between the neurons and the basa ganglia. And the basa ganglia is in charge of motor functions. And for some reason, they seem to be heightened or they have extra functionality after the abduction. He also discovered that this heightened function in the basa ganglia runs in the abductee's family. It's something interesting and noteworthy. The family abduction seems to be a recurring theme in John Mack's book, Abduction. I'd like to show a short video of a family in Lancaster who had been abducted, and they're filming of a UFO.
Is that? Oh my god! Oh my god! Shut up.
I'm in awe. I swear to God, I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like that.
No, everyone, shut up! Why?
Oh, that is going fast.
That ain't no drone. Stop! Don't go over there. Don't leave. Don't leave. No. A UFO. I'm not joking. It literally came out of nowhere. It's aliens. I believe in aliens. I believe in aliens more than God.
Believes in aliens more than she believes in God. I'd like to show a short part of an interview conducted by John Greenwald from the Black Vault podcast. And he's interviewing President Clinton's ex-CIA director, James Woolsey.
James Woolsey headed the Central Intelligence Agency as Director of Central Intelligence during Clinton's administration. He came public with an otherworldly anecdote that could give us a hint.
Can I ask you to clarify, were you using an analogy or were you being serious that you had a friend that had an aircraft of 40,000 feet that mysteriously stopped?
I talked to someone whom I respect who says that there was some event in which an aircraft was paused. And basically that's all I know about that.
Wow. I mean, you're kind of blowing my mind there. I really didn't expect that type of a story. And I appreciate you sharing that.
It's reported that NHIs can bend gravity to project their craft forward, and gravity and time control allows them to be stealthy. The NHIs in the aerial school incident seemed to be stealthy. They didn't even walk. They seemed to float, according to the kids.
He moved kind of strangely, I'd say, almost like a very graceful sort of movement. You know, not like you're stumbling around or anything. You like sort of like glided.
Robert Mack as an adult.
There wasn't any gravitational pull. It was a very fluid.
So these are the aerial school students years later as adults. Remember, they were in grade 6 when this happened to them in Zimbabwe. They're talking about the fluid movements of the NHIs.
So when he was moving, it was very fluid and flowy, and it wasn't kind of jerky or, yeah.
The strange thing was it was running in slow motion, as if you would watch a replay in a football match. It was running in slow motion diagonally down the field. And then suddenly it would reappear in the corner where it started and do the same thing. And then it would reappear and do the same thing.
So according to her description, it seemed like it was running, then it would go back to where it was or reappear where it was and start all over again. It certainly seems as though they're manipulating time and space. Aliens are often described as the aerial school children describe them as being small, childlike, like Skinny Bob here, big black eyes that are extremely hypnotic. And abductees that look into their eyes have ideas and thoughts transferred into them. Abductees usually are taken on board where medical practices take place. The short NHIs are always in the room and act as there's a taller one that acts as a leader and usually calms the abductee.
Her fingers and all come over and pinched me on the side of the cheek. And then she took her finger and run down my throat and got behind that little thing that hangs down back there and tried to come up in my nasal cavity. And that was when it started hurting and I started choking and I got scared. And she just kind of telepathically told me, you know, don't be afraid, we're not going to hurt you.
Most of the procedures done on the spaceship seem to involve insemination, artificial insemination, I guess in the hopes of creating a hybrid between them and us. And sometimes it's painful and very awkward. And there's always a taller praying mantis type that seems to calm them down. Somehow the women always seem to know that the baby is theirs afterward, and they're almost immediately shown, if not 3 months later, shown a baby after the artificial insemination. But many complain that it's very painful.
Extract sperm, I don't know how they do it.
And I found myself in this room and I was lying on this stretcher and this being, I don't even know how to say this, he started to put my legs apart.
Most times I just know it's happening, though from my vantage point on a table with my legs in the air.
And the next thing that followed after that was that my legs were being spread apart. And then I really started to panic. And then the next thing I felt after that was this most incredible pain that I've ever felt in my life. And that felt like a bullet shot up into my uterus and hit the top of my uterus.
And this female brought a baby and she sort of handed him to me. And I instantly said, this baby is mine, I know.
So that's interesting that telepathically she knew that immediately it was her baby. A lot of times the encounters involve warnings or information about our environment. It's telepathic communication that goes on.
Something was something to do with the environment.
I kept getting these thoughts and ideas in my mind of technology. Technology is not helping, technology is bad.
And we're going down a wrong path, and we have to start recognizing that what we're doing is detrimental, and we need to make changes. And I don't know what to do with that. Or
so in John Mack's book, some of the abductees talk about the aliens wanting to repopulate the Earth. And after the population drops, they would insert a new version of us. And you got to wonder, do they do this already? There's a genetic bottleneck theory that between 50 to 100,000 years ago, the population was reduced. And this has happened through floods or catastrophic events. It would be interesting to know, though, what the military knows about all of this. Here's a story by an ex-military person called Terry Lovelace and his abduction experiences. This is the story of Terry Lovelace, who was in the military between 1973 and 1979 was his active duty. He wrote a book about his own abduction experiences called The Incident at Devil's Den. It's a compelling proof of his own abduction experiences, alien government involvement, and alien implants, which are discovered on routine x-rays that he had. Here's the story of Terry Lovelace.
Early evening, 9 o'clock-ish, we are on these air mattresses and we have a campfire in between us. I noticed that the sounds of the forest, the crickets, the tree frogs, all the stuff that makes noise in the forest at night, stopped. And a few minutes after that, my friend says, "Hey Terry, were those lights there before?" And on the western horizon, there was a triangle of 3 little stars. And we thought maybe it's some kind of aircraft. We were familiar with aircraft. We had no any kind of aircraft that had that triangular configuration of lights. And it came in over the forest, and we could see the treetops illuminate with this dark shadow in between. And I looked out over the meadow, and I saw 2 things. This triangle that had been 3,000 feet over our heads just some hours earlier has descended and is now 30 feet over the top of the meadow. The second thing that I saw was what I thought to be a dozen, maybe 15 kids. And I'm like, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And then Toby said in a very serious tone, "Look at them again, Terry, they're not human beings." And he says, "Don't you remember? They took us inside that thing and they hurt us." And I wanted to cry. I was just overwhelmed because I had a mental flash of being inside the thing.
You're sitting inside and you just, well, in the book you describe you're pinched between people.
This is Eric Norcross from the Eric Norcross podcast.
People. And they're kind of, I visualized it based on your description that you were sitting in a row of people. You couldn't turn your head, but you could move your eyes around.
Just like us, they were all nude, all holding their clothing in their arms like this, and all of them rolling their eyes all over the place, and all of them crying. And it was a mixed bag of men, women, and children.
Does that, when you see uniformed service officers?
So about 7 guys and a woman, could have been 6, about that, walked across our field of view, would not look at us. Of course, we had no way to communicate with them. Never heard them speak, never heard them say a word. They wore tan-colored flight suits, and they had round orange patches on the shoulders. And I swear they wore GI issue combat boots. It sure looked like the same ones I had on my feet, or in my arms at that point.
It's interesting that Terry Lovelace mentioned that he saw 7 guys and a woman with tan-colored flight suits and a round orange patch on the shoulders on the ship. Because that sounds like the American military personnel. Could it be that Dr. Stephen Greer is correct and that these abductions are being conducted by the U.S. military?
So how do we discern, Stephen, as you put it, and I will know it, the copycat programs that are being created, that are created right now, not just in technology, but even in the copycat programs of human beings?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, one of them, I have a whole group of military guys that I've worked with, and that I continue to have an expanding network of these gentlemen who have worked within the corporate world primarily, but also within certain compartmented operations, where they have used ET looking like robots, what are called alien reproduction vehicles, these things that look like flying saucers that are made at Lockheed Skunk Works, and have used all kinds of advanced technologies to for example, quote, abduct people and to create the seeds of fear and doubt. And people go, is that really possible? I said, oh, yeah, they've had that ability since at least the 50s. And they've been doing it. And the reason they've been doing it is that one of these Army Rangers that I dealt with, who was on a team, a squad that did this, he said, well, you wouldn't believe how many senior military and even political people have had these kinds of staged encounters done by humans to look, quote, alien, so that they would support the secret Star Wars program and support the secret agenda of creating conflict with these civilizations in space. It's a very slick program, and most people, here's something that's very counterintuitive. The truth is more bizarre than the fiction being put out there, and so it hides itself. The truth hides itself in terms of how deeply convoluted these ridiculous programs are. But once you understand what the agenda is behind it, it's not hard to figure it out, and it's also not figure it out. It isn't at all difficult to figure out the difference between a pseudo ET event and an actual one, because the civilizations that are coming here from interstellar distances, they simply don't have that need. I mean, obviously, if they're able to get here, and there's very clearly a universal order that's very enforced by incredibly powerful and enlightened civilizations, they're not coming here doing stuff that are at all harmful. They wouldn't be allowed to.
Getting back to Terry Lovelace and his comment that he saw what looked like military personnel on the spacecraft during his abduction.
Round orange patches on the shoulders. And I swear they wore GI issue combat boots. They sure looked like the same ones I had on my feet or in my arms at that point.
So you got to wonder, was a deal actually made with Eisenhower, the GEADE, or the GEAD treaty, where there was an agreement for a transfer of abductees or DNA for technology?
Best thing, just drag the alien into town square. You can film that and stream it to the internet while it's happening.
Seems to be a real pushback for disclosure. And if you drag an alien through the square and film it and stream it at the same time, that would be the only way of being sure that everyone is aware of what's going on. There's a lot of false notions and disinformation being put out there. And it seems to be a divide inside the government. And Bill Nelson, the head of NASA, said that we should look at it from a scientific point of view, not a military point of view, which I agree.
There are phenomena out there that those Navy pilots know that they saw something. You've seen it on TV. Mm-hmm. And so what I decided was, well, we ought to look at this from a scientific point of view, not from a military point of view.
Harry Reid, while he was alive, the late Harry Reid, may he rest in peace, was a big proponent of disclosure. And I'd like to show his comments on it and transfer right into James Fox's interview with ex-astronaut Gordon Cooper.
He has to agree that why it's there, but shouldn't we at least be spending some money to study all these phenomena? Shouldn't we study this stuff? The answer is yes, and that's all this was about, and why the federal government all these years has covered up, put brake pads on.
I interviewed Gordon Cooper, Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper, back in the
James
90s.
Fox speaking.
Cooper said on camera that there was a landed UFO at circa 1957 at Edwards Air Force Base. His camera crew captured the filming of this object, and he presented this to the higher-ups, and eventually a courier jet came in from Washington. He handed the footage over, which was good. He viewed it.
That's the last he saw.
Exactly. Did you know where that footage went of the flying saucer that landed on the tarmac?
Went to Washington, that's all that I know.
Are you saying that there's some evidence that's still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
Here's a clip of the scientist Avi Loeb complaining about how social media a lot of times gets in the way of disclosure and just acts as an obstruction.
We need extraordinary evidence and then step on the grass and not allow it to grow, which is currently the case. We need extraordinary evidence, but anyone that mentions this possibility is ridiculed by some blogger that doesn't even write a single paper in a decade. That makes no sense whatsoever. This blogger should first practice science,
Well, some of us do.
No, let me finish. How dare people make statements about scientists that explore this possibility culture that I'm talking about? There is an acidic culture that suppresses innovation in the current culture of science.
John Mack, he provided scientific research and evidence, clinical evidence, as well as sometimes physical evidence of alien abduction or abductions per se. According to Dr. Stephen Greer, aliens are not behind the abductions.
There is physical evidence, okay? There is the lesions on people's bodies, like David's described. There is the burned earth. In many cases, they've been documented. You can just deny it, but there's, Linda, how many?
What evidence would you offer a layman who might be watching?
The evidence is a combination of the clinical evidence of people of sound mind describing the presence of beings who come to them and they have nothing to gain, and it is described altogether as real.
Okay, so unfortunately, John Mack passed away in 2004. He was struck by a intoxicated driver. May he rest in peace. Gave a lot of respectability to ufology, put his career on the line, and added a lot of clinical evidence. People are experiencing something, whether it's abductions by aliens or otherwise. He proved that people are not imagining this. Mack's work with the aerial school kids in Zimbabwe also was very noteworthy. In that case, kids had contact, but they were not abducted. So it makes you wonder, in other cases, though, people were abducted. Were those man-made abductions? I appreciated the fact that John Mack worked with both abductees and the kids in the aerial school, because that provided a bit of analogy and a comparison as to two different contact experiences, one actual abduction, and the other, the kids were just given information or advice on the future of the environment. I guess that proves that the NHIs are not necessarily evil. They treat us, I guess, similar to how we treat pets. Sometimes we bring pets to the veterinarian and it might seem like they're being abducted. Maybe if we fix some of our behavior, things might improve. Maybe if our species grows up, or maybe we just need to grow up. Anyway, this podcast is dedicated in memory of Dr. Johnny Mack. But it was interesting to look at abductions from a clinical point of view and also contrast that with Dr. Stephen Greer's opinion that abductions are being stagecraft or being falsified by the U.S. government in order to create a threat narrative. This has been UFO Disclosure. My name is Al Barrows. Please keep searching for the truth. All my love and good intentions go out to all. My prayers and hopes for peace continue for Gaza and the Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my podcast. And Happy New Year to all, and a peaceful one and a prosperous one to all.